You were never meant to hear this. Even now, 166 years later, men who carry old Charleston blood would pay dearly to keep what I'm about to tell you buried, because some stories are not just forgotten, they are sealed away for a reason. Picture it, a humid August night, Charleston, 1859. The city sleeps under a blanket of heat, the air thick with the mingled scents of magnolia and human sweat. St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church stands in the dark like a sentinel, its Gothic spires piercing the sky like daggers. Behind its locked doors, a man of God is about to vanish, leaving behind nothing but a blood-stained Bible and a single chilling sentence scrawled in his own hand. The congregation demands its sacrifice. The covenant must be honored. Reverend Elias Thornfield wasn't just any preacher. He was Charleston's spiritual lion, magnetic, eloquent, a man whose sermons could make even the most hardened plantation barons tremble. He knew their sins, their secret shames, and the bargains they'd made to hold power. But on that night, something shifted. Witnesses later described him as distracted, his piercing blue eyes clouded, his silvered hair damp with sweat. He dismissed his secretary early, bolted himself inside his study, and waited, for who or what, no one could say. 3 men arrived under cover of darkness, a judge, a doctor, and a tobacco magnate, all pillars of Charleston's aristocracy. They entered Thornfield's study, and what happened next was smothered under a century of lies. Only fragments survived, raised voices, the word covenant spoken with terror, and Thornfield's laughter, an inhuman sound that made one witness swear later. It wasn't his voice anymore. By dawn, the preacher was gone. The heavy oak door was still locked from within. The shutters were barred, the iron unbroken, and on the desk beside the blood-stained Bible lay a key and a photograph of 13 men standing solemnly around an altar. For over 160 years, the Diocese of Charleston kept the truth under lock and key, calling Thornfield's disappearance a tragic mystery. But in the past year, forbidden letters surfaced, letters that speak of a covenant of 13, of a ritual older than the city itself, and of a debt that had come due. Ask yourself this: what power could make senators, judges, and bankers kneel in terror before a single preacher? And why, after all this time, are men still willing to kill to keep the truth silent? Tonight, I'm going to take you further than anyone has dared, past the official records, past the polite lies of Charleston's elite, down into the forbidden corridors of a story designed to stay hidden. Because once you know what happened that night, you will never see history, faith, or power the same way again. You've been warned. The key lay there, cold and untouched, beside the blood-stained Bible, its crimson stains already dried into the ancient leather, as though it had absorbed something more than mere human blood. A single candle had burned itself down to nothing, leaving behind only the warped pool of wax on the mahogany desk, and in the center of that wax sat the note that would haunt Charleston's conscience for the next century. The congregation demands its sacrifice. The covenant must be honored. No one in that room dared to read it aloud. Marcus Webb, who had spent 40 years as custodian of the church, dropped to his knees, clutching at his rosary with trembling fingers, as if the very act of speaking the words might call forth whatever force had claimed the preacher. Sarah Beaumont turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth to stifle the rising wave of nausea. Every instinct screamed that the room was no longer a place of God, but an empty shell where something terrible had happened, something that had left an aftertaste of ice in the air. As news of Reverend Thornfield's disappearance spread through Charleston, panic and whispered speculation spread faster than the yellow fever that gripped the city. The official line, hastily released by the diocese, claimed that the Reverend had left on a sudden spiritual retreat, but no one in the pews believed that. They had seen the carriages that carried Charleston's most powerful men to the church the previous evening. They had heard the strange noises, the midnight screams muffled by stained glass and stone. And some, those few with eyes sharpened by fear, claimed they had seen something else entirely, a pale, faceless figure drifting between the church's Gothic spires just as the bells tolled midnight, something that moved against the wind, as though pulled by invisible strings. Behind closed doors, an emergency council of Charleston's ruling families convened. Rutledge, Crenshaw, Fitzhugh, their faces pale, their voices clipped with the urgency of men trying to contain a fire already burning out of control. They had been with Thornfield last, they had heard his final words, and though none dared speak it aloud, all three knew the truth. The covenant had been invoked, and once invoked, it demanded fulfillment. If Thornfield was gone, then the price had not yet been fully paid. Each man left that meeting carrying an invisible weight, a shadow that followed them home through cobblestone streets, washed in gaslight and fear. Meanwhile, Sarah Beaumont could not shake the memory of the daguerreotype she had glimpsed in Thornfield's drawer. 13 men in ceremonial dress gathered around an altar that did not belong in any Christian sanctuary she had ever seen. The image had burned itself into her mind, the strange, angular markings carved into the stone, the robed figures whose faces seemed blurred, as if the camera itself had recoiled from recording them. She began to piece together what she knew of Thornfield's final weeks, the cryptic letters he received at odd hours, his sudden preoccupation with ancient languages, the gold pocket watch engraved with a Latin phrase she had never been able to translate. And one question would not let her sleep. What covenant had he spoken of? And who or what was the congregation that demanded its sacrifice? As the days turned to weeks, Thornfield's name began to fade from public conversation, suppressed by a diocese desperate to contain scandal. But in Charleston's back alleys and taverns, rumors fermented like rot. Some whispered that Thornfield had been taken by agents of a secret society, punished for uncovering truths meant to remain buried. Others insisted he had willingly offered himself, that the preacher whose voice had swayed senators and slave lords alike had been preparing for something far darker than redemption. The truth, of course, was more dangerous than either story, and it was buried deep beneath layers of power, blood, and oath-bound silence. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The first cracks in the facade, the realization that this was never about a missing preacher, but about the hidden machinery that decides who is consumed and who survives. And once you've glimpsed it, truly glimpsed it, you cannot unsee it. The first true sign that Charleston was beginning to rot from within came the night the river turned black. Not with mud or oil, but with something thicker, almost alive, a slick sheen that caught the moonlight and shimmered like the surface of a crow's wing. By morning, hundreds of fish floated belly up, their eyes clouded, their bodies marked with strange concentric burns. The city blamed an upstream spill, but those who had seen the river at midnight told another story. They whispered of a procession of hooded figures along the banks, each bearing a lantern that burned with a pale greenish fire. Sarah Beaumont was there. She had followed Marcus Webb, the old custodian, after he stumbled from the church crypts that evening, half mad and muttering about keys and locks and doors that should never be opened. He led her to the edge of the Ashley River, where the figures knelt in silent prayer before lowering someone, into the water. She could not see the face of what they submerged, only the violent thrashing that subsided far too quickly. By the time she blinked away the shock, Marcus was gone, leaving only his rosary tangled in the reeds. The next morning, Charleston woke to its first plague of the season. The yellow fever struck with a swiftness that defied reason. Entire households collapsed overnight, leaving the wealthy scrambling to flee inland. Yet the fever did not touch everyone. Servants in the grand houses on Meeting Street fell ill by the dozens, while their masters remained untouched. Among the city's poorest, dock workers, freedmen, and the Irish laborers, the disease seemed almost deliberate, carving through neighborhoods with surgical precision. Sarah, who had once scoffed at talk of curses, began to suspect something far worse, that this was not a sickness of nature but a selection, a culling designed to thin the herd according to some ancient design. In the shadow of the outbreak, the congregation became bolder. Strange gatherings met openly in the church's upper galleries under the guise of vigils for the dead. Those who attended returned changed, their eyes glassy, their movements unnervingly synchronized, like puppets strung from the same invisible hand. Even the city's magistrates were not immune. More than once, Sarah caught sight of Judge Crenshaw, a man who had once presided with iron authority, standing silent in the gallery, with his head bowed, lips moving soundlessly in prayer. Then came the night the bells rang at an hour no clock kept. Sarah was in the rectory archives when the sound tore through the silence. 12 chimes, each one heavier than the last, vibrating through the stone walls like the heartbeat of something vast and buried. She stumbled outside in time to see the spire of St. Cyprian's illuminated by an otherworldly glow. For a moment, she thought she saw them. 13 figures arranged in a circle atop the tower, each holding aloft a key that caught the moonlight like a blade, and at their center, suspended above the steeple by nothing she could comprehend, hung a shape that was not entirely human, its outline writhing like heat haze. The next morning the river ran clear again as though nothing had happened. But Sarah knew better. The covenant was no longer a whisper. It was awake, moving beneath Charleston's cobblestones and waterways, claiming what it was owed. And though she tried to warn those few who would still listen, she saw the same thing in their eyes that haunted her own reflection, the creeping realization that the city was already lost. Sarah's search for answers led her deeper into St. Cyprian's than she had ever dared to go. The church had always been a maze, its crypts carved into the very bedrock of Charleston, older than the city itself. Many of the tunnels had long since been bricked over, their entrances sealed with lead and plaster, as though the masons feared what lay beyond. Yet Marcus Webb's old keys still hung from the rectory wall, and one by one, Sarah found the locks that fit them. The air grew heavier the further she descended. Salt and mildew clung to the stone, and the drip of unseen water echoed like distant footsteps. Along the walls she found carvings, sigils worn smooth by centuries of damp, depicting shapes that set her teeth on edge. They were not Christian crosses nor any symbols she could place, but instead interlocking spirals and eyes without pupils, arranged in patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. At last, she reached a door unlike any she had seen before. It was not wood nor iron, but a seamless slab of black stone that drank in the lamplight. Around its edge were 13 keyholes, each one different, each inscribed with characters that hurt her eyes to read. She tried Marcus's keys, but none turned. For a moment she considered turning back. Then she saw the inscription etched above the door, a phrase in Latin, barely legible beneath centuries of grime: Quod legatum est in caelo, solvitur in terra. What is bound in heaven will be loosed on earth. Behind that door, she knew, was the truth of what Reverend Thornfield had promised his congregation. Thornfield had been many things: preacher, scholar, and to some, a savior. But in the pages of his private journals, which Sarah had recovered from a false-bottomed drawer in his study, he was something else entirely, a man obsessed with ascension. The entries grew more frenzied, the closer they came to his disappearance. He wrote of the Covenant of 13, an unbroken line of faithful stretching back to the city's founding. Each generation sworn to guard a key, each key a promise to one day unseal what lay bound beneath St. Cyprian's. Thornfield had become convinced that the time was near, that the city's season of harvest had begun. In his final entry, written in a shaky hand, he confessed, "I have seen the shape in the water. I have heard its voice in the tolling of the bells. It does not ask for worship, only obedience. When the door opens, all debts shall be paid, and the city will rise renewed. God forgive me, for I do this not for them, but for myself." As Sarah lowered the journal, the chill in the crypt thickened. Somewhere beyond the black door, something moved, a slow, deliberate stirring, as though her presence had been noted. For the first time, she understood why Marcus had said, "Some doors should never be opened." And yet in the pit of her stomach, she knew the congregation no longer waited for permission. The keys were gathering, and soon the stone would turn. The first gathering took place 3 nights later, beneath the waning crescent moon. Sarah had followed them, a silent procession of men and women she had once known as neighbors, teachers, and store clerks. Each carried something wrapped in linen, clutched tight against their chests. They moved with the eerie synchronization of people walking in a dream, their bare feet whispering against the worn flagstones as they descended into the crypt. From her hiding place behind a cracked pillar, Sarah watched as they encircled the black door. One by one, they unwrapped their offerings, 13 keys, each different, each pulsing faintly as though lit from within. Reverend Thornfield was not among them, but Marcus Webb stood at the head of the circle, his face illuminated by the cold glow of the keys. When he spoke, His voice carried the cadence of a man reading from memory, each word older than the church itself. By covenant of the first 13, by blood sealed, by time unbroken, what was bound above shall be loosed below. The congregation answered as one, their voices blending into a low, resonant hum that made the very stones vibrate. Sarah's eyes darted to the keys. As each one was inserted into its corresponding lock, the sigils around the door ignited with a sickly green light. The air grew dense, oppressive, thick enough that every breath burned her lungs. She felt the hum in her bones, an alien frequency that made her teeth ache. Then, with a sound like a groaning leviathan, the black stone door shifted. From the darkness beyond came a draft of air that smelled of salt, rust, and something far older, the scent of deep, sunless water. The congregation fell to their knees. Marcus turned to them, his eyes catching the green light, twin pinpoints of reflection like those of an animal. "Behold," he intoned, "the harvest begins." And then Sarah saw it. Movement in the void beyond the door. Not one thing, but many, writhing and coalescing, shapes too vast to fully comprehend. She glimpsed only fragments, slick, pale limbs ending in clawed fingers, and 1,000 unblinking eyes that opened in unison, fixing on the kneeling congregation. Her heart pounded so hard she feared the sound would betray her. Whatever waited beyond that door had been dreaming, and now it was awake. Sarah stumbled back from the pillar, her breath caught in her throat. She had to get out, had to run before anyone noticed her. But the crypt was not as dark as before. The green glow from the open door cast long, inhuman shadows across the walls, and one of those shadows moved differently, against the grain. "Who's there?" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. Every head in the congregation turned toward her hiding place. Panic surged through her, and she bolted. Her shoes scraped the stone, echoing like gunfire. "Stop her!" Hands reached for her from the edges of the circle, pale fingers clawing at her sleeves as she twisted free. Someone grabbed a fistful of her hair. She wrenched her head back so violently she felt strands tear from her scalp. She sprinted for the stairs, and then froze. At the foot of the steps, blocking her escape, stood Reverend Thornfield. He held one of the 13 keys in his palm, the metal searing bright against his withered skin. "You've seen too much," he said, his tone not angry, but almost sorrowful. "Now you must choose." Marcus and the others closed in behind her, forming a ring of blank, expectant faces. Thornfield extended the key toward her. Up close, she could see that the metal writhed, its surface alive, engraved with symbols that shifted when she tried to focus on them. "Take it," he said. "Take your place among us, or leave here empty, and watch the city drown." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. The smell from beyond the door, salt, rust, and that ancient drowning cold, pressed around her, suffocating. "If I take the key, what happens to me?" Behind her, the black door groaned wider. Something massive shifted just beyond the threshold, and for the briefest moment she felt its gaze, not with her eyes but in her mind, a presence vast and curious, like the deep ocean considering a single drop of rain. Sarah's fingers trembled inches from the key. The metal pulsed, almost alive, and with every beat she felt her own heartbeat falter, sinking to its alien rhythm. Take it, and the city lives. Refuse, and it drowns. Her mind spun. What if both are lies? A scream tore through the crypt, not human, a sound like metal shearing underwater. The black door yawned wider, and for a heartbeat Sarah saw what waited beyond. A colossal silhouette with too many limbs and eyes, each gaze pressing on her skull like deep-sea pressure. She snatched the key. Agony lanced through her palm. The living metal melted into her skin, burning sigils up her arm until they disappeared beneath her sleeve. The congregation exhaled as one, a shuddering sigh of relief. "It is done," Reverend Thornfield whispered, bowing his head. "The 13th keeper has accepted the burden." Sarah staggered back. What did you do to me?" Marcus stepped forward, his eyes bright with something that might have been reverence. "You hold the seal now, The door will close. For another year, the tide will not rise. Behind them, the monstrous silhouette withdrew. The door groaned shut, its surface knitting together like a healing wound. The green light winked out, plunging the crypt into darkness lit only by trembling candles. Sarah fell to her knees, clutching her scorched hand. "You used me," she rasped. Thornfield knelt beside her. His voice was almost gentle. "We saved them all. 13 souls must bear the seal, or the drowned god will claim the city. Tonight, it chose you. But why me?" He smiled sadly. "Because you were listening." By the time Sarah stumbled out of the church, dawn was bleeding over the horizon. The storm had broken, leaving the streets slick and steaming, but she barely felt the cool drizzle. Her palm throbbed beneath her sleeve, each pulse of the strange sigil echoing in her skull like a second heartbeat. Marcus followed a few paces behind, silent. She spun on him. "What the hell did you drag me into?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held up his own hand. For the first time, Sarah noticed the faint scars etched into his skin, twisted, half-faded patterns that mirrored her own burn. "I was the 12th, he said quietly. "I carried it for a year. Now it's yours." The words hit harder than she expected. "And what happens to me?" His expression was unreadable. "You'll hear them, feel them. The drowned aren't quiet, Sarah. But if you can endure it, the city lives." Sarah shook her head, backing away. "No, I'm not. I didn't choose this." "The seal doesn't care about choice," Marcus said. "It only cares that it's kept. And if you fail, if you drop it, if you falter, the door opens again." As he spoke, a ripple of nausea rolled through her. She doubled over, gripping her stomach. For an instant, her vision shifted. The city around her dissolved into black water, its buildings jutting up like rotting pylons, and beneath the surface, shapes moved, thousands of them. When she blinked, it was gone. Marcus stepped closer, his voice urgent. "They know you now, and they'll call to you. Whatever happens, you can't answer." Sarah didn't go home. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, the drowned city surged up behind her eyelids, black water, writhing silhouettes, and that endless chorus of whispers pressing against her mind. By the time she found herself on the rooftop of an old parking structure, the sun was well above the skyline. She clutched her burned hand to her chest, half hoping the sigil would fade with daylight. It didn't. The marks had deepened, the skin around them angry and bruised, the lines pulsing faintly as if alive. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Unknown. They're awake now. Stay moving." She nearly dropped it. Another buzz, this one louder, inside her skull. The whispers. Not words. Images. A child, barefoot and pale, standing in the shallows. Something just beyond her reach, coiling upward from the depths. A hand. Sarah's own, reaching out. She gasped, stumbling backward. The vision shattered, but the aftertaste remained, a briny tang in the back of her throat. Then she heard it, a wet scraping sound, too close. Across the roof, by the stairwell door, something was dragging itself into the light. Its outline was human, but wrong, joints bent backward, skin a pallid grey-blue. Water streamed from its mouth in steady rivulets. The whispers spiked into a scream. Sarah turned to run, but the sigil in her palm flared hot, locking her in place. She couldn't look away. The creature spoke without opening its mouth, a hollow voice filling her mind. "You carry it now. Give it back." Sarah staggered backward, the heat of the sigil searing through her palm. The drowned thing took a step closer, each movement jerky and stuttering, as if it were being puppeted by invisible strings. Water dripped from its hollow eyes, splattering against the rooftop and pooling around its bare, splayed feet. "Give it back." The voice wasn't a sound so much as an intrusion, forced into her skull. Her thoughts stuttered, caught like insects in a web. She tried to speak, to demand what it wanted, but her jaw wouldn't obey. Another step forward, its chest rose and fell with unnatural rhythm, gills pulsing faintly along its neck. Its skin looked stretched too tightly over its bones, as if it had been boiled and shrunk. With each wordless demand, the heat in her palm grew until she thought it would melt through her flesh. "Give it back." "No!" The word tore free in a ragged shout, surprising even her. The thing halted, cocking its head to one side. She sensed not confusion, but curiosity, like a predator studying prey that had done something unexpected. "I don't even know what this is," she shouted, raising her hand to show the pulsing sigil. The creature hissed, a sound that set her teeth on edge. The black lines in her palm flared in response, spilling faint light that shimmered like reflections on deep water. For a heartbeat, the drowned thing shrank back. Then it lunged. Sarah ran. The rooftop offered nowhere to hide. The nearest stairwell door was blocked by the creature's dripping, misshapen form. She sprinted for the far side, her burned hand blazing with pain, the whispers inside her skull now an indistinct chorus. She risked a glance over her shoulder. It was faster than it looked. Scrambling after her with a horrifying insect-like gait, her feet hit the low wall at the roof's edge. Beyond it, 8 stories of empty air and the street below. She turned just as the thing lunged again. Acting on instinct, she raised her sigil-marked hand between them like a shield. The air shivered. A wall of pressure erupted outward, invisible but tangible, slamming into the drowned creature and hurling it backward across the roof. It hit the ground with a wet crack, limbs bending unnaturally as it tried to rise. Sarah stared at her own hand in shock. Wisps of dark mist curled upward from the sigil, and for an instant she glimpsed a dark surface beneath her skin, as if a fragment of some greater, hungering sea churned inside her. The drowned thing rose to its feet, slower this time, and spoke again. "The seal breaks. All of you will drown." With a rattling hiss, it lurched backward, then toppled over the roof's edge, vanishing into the street below. Sarah rushed to the ledge, peering down, but the street was empty. Only a spreading puddle of seawater remained, already evaporating in the heat. Her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees. Her hand throbbed with every beat of her heart. The sigil wasn't just burned into her flesh, it was her flesh now, its lines running deeper than skin. The whispers faded to a low murmur, like the hush of waves retreating from shore. She tried to breathe, but every inhale carried the salty sting of the drowned city. Her phone buzzed. Another message. "Unknown. You've seen one. They'll keep coming. Meet me at Pier 34 before nightfall, or it's over." Sarah stared at the words, then at the distant skyline, where the ocean fog was already rolling in. Whatever the seal was holding back, it wasn't going to wait. Sarah's car skidded to a stop beside the rusted gates of Pier 34. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, but fog had already swallowed the coastline. Salt air stung her throat, and the rhythmic crash of waves echoed through the emptiness, louder than it should have been. She hesitated before stepping out. The sigil in her palm still burned faintly, a reminder of the drowned thing and its impossible strength. She pulled her jacket sleeve over it, hiding the light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. A figure emerged from the mist. "Sarah?" The voice was low, cautious. She tensed, ready to bolt, until the figure stepped closer into the waning light of a sodium lamp. A man, maybe mid-30s, with dark, weathered skin and a deep scar running from temple to jaw. He carried himself with the wary precision of someone who had seen far too much. "You're late," he said. "And you're the one who's been spamming my phone?" she snapped. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the deserted pier, as if expecting to see something creeping from the fog. "Name's Calder. I sent the messages because you're marked now. They'll keep coming until either you give them what they want, or you drown like the rest." Sarah's pulse spiked. "What are they?" "Not alive, not dead. They're called back by the breaking of the seal. Think of them as the first leaks in a dam that's about to give way." Sarah pulled her sleeve back, showing him the sigil. "Then tell me what the hell this is, because one of them nearly killed me for it." Calder studied the mark, his jaw tightening. "That's a fragment. When the seal first cracked, pieces of it scattered. Most sank back into the deeps. Some found hosts. You're one of them now." "I didn't ask for this. No one ever does." He pulled a small, water-stained notebook from his coat and flipped it open to a page of sketches. See, gills like hers, variations repeating in dizzying fractals. Every fragment carries a piece of the seal's power. It lets you repel what comes through, but it also puts a target on your back. They can smell it on you. Sarah swallowed hard. And what happens if they get it? The seal weakens faster. The thing on the other side pushes through sooner. A gust of wind tore through the pier, carrying the sound of something moving out on the water. Sarah turned toward the sea and caught glimpses of shapes in the fog, too large, too numerous to be boats. "They're early," Calder muttered, snapping the notebook shut. "I thought you said nightfall." "I said before nightfall," he corrected sharply. "Once full dark hits, we won't make it off this pier alive." Sarah backed away from the water's edge, her thoughts racing. "So what do we do? Run?" "No. We get you out of the city. There's a safe house inland and maybe—" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze locking on something behind her. Sarah spun. Through the fog, figures were emerging, dozens of them, all waterlogged, their movements stiff and puppet-like. The same hollow-eyed things that had hunted her on the rooftop. Their jaws hung slack, seawater streaming in rivulets from their mouths. "They've found you," Calder said grimly. The closest one lurched forward, gurgling, and Sarah instinctively raised her marked hand. The sigil flared bright, sending a ripple of pressure outward that sent the creature skidding back across the wet planks. More were coming. Calder drew a curved blade from under his coat, the metal etched with the same patterns as Sarah's sigil. "Stay behind me, and whatever happens, don't let them touch your hand." Sarah's grip tightened on her sleeve. The whispers in her mind, dormant since the rooftop, rose into a deafening roar. The horde surged closer. The first of the drowned things lunged. Calder's blade arced through the mist, severing its head in one clean motion. The corpse collapsed, seawater spilling from its neck like a ruptured hydrant. Another creature barreled forward, and Sarah raised her hand on instinct. The sigil flared, a concussive blast rippling outward, hurling the creature into the rail with a sickening crunch. "Don't overuse it," Calder barked, parrying another strike. "The fragment will eat you alive if you let it." But the mark burned hotter, and with every pulse came a rush of strength, raw, intoxicating, terrifying. Sarah could feel the drowned things before they moved, as if their presence sent out ripples in the air. They came in waves, clambering onto the pier, their slack jaws emitting guttural wails. Calder carved through them with surgical precision, his etched blade leaving trails of sizzling seawater where it struck. Each time Sarah's sigil lit, the creatures recoiled, but she felt something pressing back against her mind, whispering in an alien tongue. A massive shadow rose from the water. For a moment, Sarah's breath caught. It wasn't just another drowned thing. This one towered above the others, its elongated limbs ending in barbed claws. Seaweed clung to its skeletal frame, and its face, a hollow mask of coral, split open to reveal a maw lined with teeth like broken glass. "Down!" Calder shouted, shoving her aside as the creature slammed a claw into the pier. Planks exploded upward, sending splinters flying. Sarah scrambled to her feet. Her hand burned white-hot now, the sigil's light streaming like liquid fire. She thrust it toward the towering figure, unleashing a blast of energy that tore through the fog and carved a glowing trench in the pier. The creature shrieked, a sound that vibrated through bone, and stumbled back into the water, leaving behind a frothing wake. "They won't stop," Calder warned, grabbing her arm. "We have to move, now." They sprinted toward the far end of the pier. Behind them, the horde surged, their hollow-eyed faces locked on Sarah. The marks seared against her skin with every step, urging her to turn and fight, to unleash everything it held. "Don't listen to it," Calder snapped as if reading her thoughts. "That voice isn't yours." Ahead, a battered SUV waited at the edge of the lot. Calder fumbled with the keys, cursing under his breath. Sarah risked a glance over her shoulder. The drowned things were gaining, their movements unnervingly precise. A clawed hand slammed onto the hood. Calder wrenched the door open and shoved her inside. He jammed the keys into the ignition just as another creature climbed onto the roof, its bloated body crushing the metal inward. "Hang on." Calder gunned the engine. The SUV lurched forward, sending the creature tumbling into the fog. Tires squealed as they tore away from the pier, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. Only when the coastline disappeared in the rearview mirror did Calder allow himself to breathe. He kept one white-knuckled hand on the wheel, his eyes scanning the darkened highway. Sarah cradled her marked hand against her chest, the sigil's glow finally dimming, but the whispers didn't fade. They had grown louder, pressing at the edges of her thoughts. "What's happening to me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Calder hesitated. "The fragment's waking up. And if we don't reach the safe house before it fully awakens, it won't matter how many of them we kill. You'll drown from the inside out." The SUV's headlights carved a narrow path through the mist-choked backroads, the endless grey swallowing the world beyond. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest, her marked hand still throbbing with residual heat. Calder hadn't spoken since the highway, his focus locked on the road ahead, jaw tight enough to crack stone. Finally, the trees thinned, revealing a squat concrete structure half buried in the hillside. To an untrained eye, it was an abandoned utility bunker. Calder pulled the SUV into a narrow alcove, killed the engine, and exhaled. "This is it?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. "Safe House 3, Calder said, checking the shadows before unlocking the door. Off-grid, shielded from their senses, at least for now. Inside, the air was damp and metallic. Rows of flickering monitors lined the walls, showing grainy feeds of distant shorelines. A map of the region was pinned to a corkboard, dotted with red circles that made Sarah's stomach turn. "What are those?" she asked, nodding at the marks. "Breaches," Calder replied flatly. "Every place the drowned things have surfaced in the last 6 months, they're spreading faster than we can contain." He crossed to a metal cabinet and withdrew a battered journal. The leather cover bore the same sigil now etched into Sarah's palm. "That mark on your hand," Calder said, dropping the journal onto a table, "isn't just a weapon, it's a seal fragment, 1 of 7. The cult you were running from, they're trying to gather them all." Sarah hesitated, the memory of the chant-filled warehouse flashing in her mind. "Why? What happens if they succeed?" Calder met her gaze, his eyes hard. "They wake the drowned king, and then everything, every living thing, goes under." He opened the journal, revealing pages of sketches, monstrous silhouettes rising from roiling seas, diagrams of symbols that made Sarah's head ache just to look. "I don't understand," she said. "Why me? Why give me this?" She held up her marked hand, the sigil faintly pulsing. "Fragments don't choose at random," Calder replied. "They need hosts strong enough to bear the weight. Most people burn out in hours. The fact you're still breathing means it likes you." The word landed like ice in her gut. "Likes me?" Calder's expression darkened. "That's not good news. Every second you hold it, the fragment digs deeper, reshaping you. Use its power too freely, and you won't be you much longer." Sarah stared at her palm, the faint glow hypnotic. She could still feel the whispers at the edge of her thoughts, promises of more strength, more control, if she'd only stop resisting. "I can feel it," she admitted. "Like, it wants me to let go." "Don't," Calder said sharply. "The fragment's a tether to something on the other side. If you give it too much ground, the drowned king will have a doorway straight through you." The weight of his words pressed the air flat between them. For a long moment, only the soft hum of the monitors filled the silence. Then Sarah looked up. "You're saying I'm a walking key, and they'll keep coming until they have me?" Calder nodded grimly. "Which means we have 2 options. Run until we can't, or learn to fight them on their own ground." Calder led Sarah deeper into the bunker, through a steel door reinforced with runic etchings. The training room beyond was stripped bare, concrete floors, mirrored walls cracked by old impacts, and a single circle of salt etched into the center. He tossed her a pair of fingerless gloves. "Put those on. They'll dampen the fragment's bleed." Sarah slid them over her hands, the leather warm against her skin. "And if this doesn't work," Calder's jaw flexed, "then we hope the bunker holds long enough for me to put you down before you lose yourself." The words landed heavy, but Sarah just nodded. She'd seen what happened to people who let the sigils take over, minds hollowed out, bodies twisted. Calder stepped into the salt circle, drawing a combat knife from his belt. "Rule 1. Control isn't about fighting the fragment. You fight it, it'll fight back. You have to learn to guide it, like riding a rip current. He slashed the blade through the air, sending a ripple of distorted energy skittering across the room. Rule 2. Never let it dictate the shape of your thoughts. The moment you start hearing its voice as your own, it's already won. Sarah swallowed hard. And Rule 3? Rule 3, Calder said, locking eyes with her. If I tell you to cut it loose, you cut it loose, no hesitation. The next hours blurred into a brutal routine. Calder forced her to summon the fragment's power in measured bursts, small glyphs that crackled against her gloves, tendrils of pale light that flickered like underwater lightning. Each time the whispers in her mind grew sharper, more insistent. Why resist, they hissed. We can unmake him. We can unmake them all. By the 4th hour, sweat stung her eyes and her muscles trembled with exhaustion. Calder tossed her a water bottle, studying her closely. You're lasting longer than I expected. The fragment's still testing you. Feels like it's winning, she muttered. Before Calder could answer, the bunker lights flickered, bathing the room in stuttering shadows. His expression hardened. They've found us. A klaxon wailed overhead, the monitors in the control room flaring to life with distorted images. Through the static, Sarah caught glimpses of movement outside the bunker. Figures shambling through the mist, their bodies waterlogged and jerking unnaturally. Calder cursed under his breath, drawing his sidearm. Drowned thralls, too many for a breach this deep. They must have a beacon. The door at the far end of the corridor shuddered under a heavy impact, then another. Hairline cracks began to spiderweb through the reinforced steel. Sarah's marked hand burned, the fragment thrumming with a predatory eagerness. They're not stopping, she said, voice shaking. Calder tossed her a spare magazine. Good. Then we don't hold back. The next blow caved the door inward, and the first of the drowned things poured through, a gaunt, eyeless creature with skin sloughing from its bones, water cascading from its jaws. Calder opened fire, the deafening bark of his pistol filling the bunker. Sarah instinctively raised her hand, the sigil beneath her glove blazing to life. A wave of searing light erupted from her palm, disintegrating the first thrall into a spray of boiling mist. For a moment, silence. Then the fragment's voice whispered, "See? We could save you all, if you only let us in." The corridor became a choke point of shrieks, gunfire, and the sickening smell of brine. Calder moved like a machine, his sidearm barking in measured bursts, each shot dropping another drowned thrall. Brass casings rang across the concrete, mingling with the guttural sounds of things that should not have been alive. Sarah's chest heaved as she summoned the fragment again. The light pouring from her marked hand was less controlled now, lancing through the invaders in wide arcs. Each blast left a searing after-image across her vision, and left her feeling hollowed out, as though the fragment was drawing more from her than just energy. More, the voice coaxed. Stop holding back. Tear them apart. Make them yours. Her knees buckled as another thrall leapt at her, its jaw distending unnaturally. Calder intercepted it with a downward knife strike, pinning the creature to the wall. "Stay with me, Sarah." "I can't." Her breath hitched, the sigil under her glove pulsing like a second heartbeat. She felt her own thoughts fraying at the edges, whispers layering over her will until she couldn't tell where she ended and the fragment began. Calder grabbed her by the collar and slammed her back against the wall. "Focus! I said guide it, not drown in it." Another impact reverberated through the bunker, the outer bulkhead giving way. A torrent of seawater surged down the corridor, sweeping drowned bodies ahead of it. Calder cursed. "They've cracked the seal. We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place floods." Through the rising water, Sarah saw something move. Something larger than the thralls, dragging itself through the breached doorway. A massive silhouette hunched low to fit through the corridor, barnacles crusted across its back, and a crown of jagged coral protruding where its head should be. "The beacon," Calder breathed, eyes narrowing. "That thing's calling them. The F." Ragman's voice rose to a fevered pitch inside Sarah's mind. "Give us to it. We will erase it. No more walls, no more chains." Calder fired a controlled burst at the creature, the rounds sparking harmlessly against its encrusted hide. "We can't kill it with conventional." "Sarah!" She had already stepped forward, water swirling around her waist, the sigil blazing bright enough to cast stark shadows across the bunker walls. Power roared through her veins, a cold, bottomless tide that threatened to pull her under. "Let go," the fragment whispered. "We will protect you. We will end them." Her heart pounded. She could feel Calder's gaze on her, feel the weight of his earlier words. "If I tell you to cut it loose, you cut it loose. No hesitation." But Calder wasn't saying anything now. The creature took another step, its bulk filling the corridor, seawater pouring from its gaping maw. Sarah raised her marked hand, and for an instant her vision fractured into two futures. One where she let go and became the fragment entirely, and another where she held on and maybe, just maybe, survived. Sarah inhaled sharply, the taste of salt water thick in her throat. The fragment's voice swelled until it was all she could hear, 1,000 whispers promising power, safety, and an end to the terror bearing down the corridor. She raised her hand higher, fingers trembling. The sigil carved into her palm flared, a spiral of blinding liquid light that split the gloom. For an instant she felt herself dissolve, her body a vessel, her thoughts distant ripples on a much deeper sea. Now the fragment urged, its tone edged with hunger. "Let us flow." With a cry torn between defiance and surrender, Sarah unleashed the power. A column of radiant energy erupted from her hand, not like light, but like the ocean itself had been inverted and forced through her. The waves slammed into the coral-crowned creature, stripping barnacle and flesh alike from its monstrous frame. The pressure shattered concrete walls, bursting rivets and filling the bunker with a deafening roar. The thing howled, a wet, bubbling scream, before collapsing into the rising water, its body unrecognizable. But the energy didn't stop. It continued to pour from Sarah, carving jagged gouges in the floor, vaporizing drowned thralls and churning the corridor into a blinding maelstrom. "Sarah, cut it off!" Calder waded toward her, fighting against the violent current. He reached for her arm, only to recoil from the searing heat radiating off her skin. "We are not finished," the fragment whispered, tendrils of light coiling up Sarah's arm and across her chest. "One more breath and all will drown." Sarah clamped her jaw shut, forcing herself to think through the haze. The fragment wasn't just lending her power, it was claiming her. Every second she held on, the line between them thinned. Calder drew his combat knife and pressed it to the base of the sigil, his voice a raw bark over the roar of the fragment's power. "Sir, I'll cut it out if I have to. Shut it down." Her gaze snapped to his, wide and unfocused. For a heartbeat, Calder saw something in her expression that wasn't Sarah at all, something vast and cold and terribly amused. And then, with a shuddering gasp, Sarah closed her fist. The torrent ceased. The light drained away, leaving her swaying on her feet, the mark on her palm still glowing faintly like a coal in the dark. The corridor was a ruin, walls collapsed, water surging in unchecked. The beacon creature was gone, its body reduced to fragments, but Sarah could barely stand. Calder caught her as she collapsed, her skin clammy, her breath ragged. "Talk to me," he demanded, shaking her lightly. "Are you still with me?" Sarah blinked up at him, her voice a rasp. "I don't know." The fragment's whisper lingered at the edge of her mind, softer now but insistent. "You felt it too. There is no going back." Calder's jaw tightened. He glanced at the breached bulkhead, then back at Sarah. The facility was seconds away from total collapse. They needed to move, now. Calder tightened his grip around Sarah, lifting her with a grunt as icy water surged around his waist. Her head lolled against his shoulder, strands of her soaked hair sticking to his neck. "Stay with me, Sarah," he muttered, his breath ragged as he fought against the rising tide. The corridor ahead was collapsing, bulkheads groaning under the relentless pressure. Somewhere deep in the facility, steel screamed as supports buckled. Every instinct told him they had minutes, if that, before the entire structure gave way. "You can't carry her fast enough," a voice whispered. Calder froze mid-step, his boots skidding on the slick floor. The voice wasn't Sarah's. It wasn't his own. "You've felt me watching," the fragment continued, its tone smooth, almost curious. "You know she won't make it out in time, not as she is." Calder's teeth clenched. "Stay out of my head." "But you called to me the moment you touched her," the voice insisted. "A sliver of her power slipped into you when you pulled her from the depths. It's why you can hear me now." He stumbled forward, half running, half wading through the torrent. His mind was a battlefield. Training screamed at him to compartmentalize, to focus on the mission, yet the voice seeped through cracks he didn't know he had. "I can lend you strength," it coaxed. "A breath of my current, enough to carry you both to safety. You need only allow it." Calder's grip on Sarah tightened. Her pulse fluttered weakly against his forearm. "You've seen what happens when I'm unleashed," he shot back in his mind. "I'm not letting you in." A low chuckle rippled through his thoughts, alien yet unsettlingly human. "You think you have a choice?" A shockwave tore through the facility, throwing Calder against the wall. Water exploded upward, sweeping away what remained of the catwalk. He slammed his shoulder hard, pain flashing white behind his eyes, but his hold on Sarah never faltered. He forced himself upright, lungs burning, and staggered toward a faint red glow ahead, the emergency bulkhead leading to the extraction shaft. "She will not survive the ascent without me," the fragment murmured. "And you are already drowning." Calder's vision blurred. His legs were numb from the cold, every step a monumental effort. He could feel Sarah slipping further away, her shallow breaths barely stirring against his chest. He reached the bulkhead and slammed his hand against the release. Nothing happened. The console flickered, sparks spitting from fried circuitry. Behind him, the corridor groaned ominously. A wall of black water surged closer, devouring the wreckage in its path. "Choose," the voice whispered, its presence pressing hard against the edges of his mind. "Let me flow through you, or watch her die here." Calder's chest heaved, his free hand gripping the useless console. He could feel the fragment's presence like a tide at the edge of his consciousness, waiting for the smallest crack in his resolve. He closed his eyes, jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. Damn it! Calder's heart pounded like a war drum as the roaring water surged closer, its thunder echoing through the steel skeleton of the collapsing facility. Sarah's limp weight in his arms felt heavier with every heartbeat, every shiver of her body fading. "There is no more time," the fragment whispered, its voice now like a current brushing against the edges of his mind. "Say yes." Calder's instincts screamed against it. He had seen what the fragment had done to the others, tearing through flesh and metal as if neither offered resistance, leaving only carnage in its wake. To let it in was to court annihilation, but Sarah's pulse was almost gone. "I don't need you," he growled, pressing his forehead against the icy bulkhead. His knuckles were white against the console, the water now up to his chest. "You will," the fragment purred, "and when you do, you will remember that I offered willingly." Another explosion rocked the corridor, and in the instant that followed, the wall behind them ruptured. A wave of water, black and unstoppable, hurtled toward them like a living thing. Calder's resolve snapped. "Fine, take it, just get us through." The effect was instantaneous. The fragment surged into him, not like a possession, but like a floodgate giving way. His muscles ignited with searing energy, every nerve screaming as alien currents threaded through his veins. He gasped, choking on the sheer power, a force that was not his, yet moved at his command. The world slowed. The rushing water became syrup-thick, each droplet suspended in the air like molten glass. Calder's limbs felt impossibly light, his body surging with borrowed strength. With one hand, he tore the emergency bulkhead control panel from the wall, metal shrieking like paper. Sparks danced across his fingers, the fragment's power coursing through him, and the sealed door buckled under the assault. A guttural roar came from his throat as he wrenched the door open. The corridor beyond was blessedly clear. Calder surged forward, every motion a blur, carrying Sarah through as the door collapsed behind them under the crushing pressure. For a brief moment, there was silence, just Calder's ragged breathing and the soft, uneven rise and fall of Sarah's chest. Then came the laughter. "See?" The fragment murmured, its voice wrapping around his thoughts like silk. You feared me, yet we are magnificent together. Calder fell to one knee, cradling Sarah. His entire body trembled, the alien energy searing every muscle. Already he could feel it pulling, trying to root itself deeper, threads of its will burrowing into his own. Get out, he rasped. Oh, I can't, it whispered. Not yet. Not while you still need me. Calder's vision dimmed. The last thing he registered was Sarah stirring faintly in his arms, alive, before darkness claimed him. Calder awoke to the cold bite of steel beneath his cheek and the faint, rhythmic hum of the facility's backup systems struggling to stay alive. His body felt wrong, too light in some places, painfully heavy in others, like his own muscles weren't entirely his. He sat up slowly, every motion sending ripples of heat and static through his veins. Sarah lay a few feet away, propped against a wall, her breathing shallow but steady. Relief hit him in a crushing wave, but it was quickly overshadowed by the other presence in the room. You survived, the fragment said, not as a voice, but as a current of thought threading itself between his own. And so did she. A fair trade for what you borrowed. Calder clenched his fists. Get out of my head. I told you before, it murmured. I can't. Not while your blood hums with what I've given you. You opened the door, Calder. There's no closing it now. He stumbled to his feet, every movement betraying a strange new grace that made his stomach twist. His hands shook, not from weakness, but from the lingering echo of the power he'd wielded. It hadn't felt like strength, it had felt like hunger. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. See, Calder? I'm here, he said, rushing to her side. Her gaze searched his face, confusion clouding her features. You look different. Calder froze. Different how? She frowned as if the answer was just out of reach. Your eyes, they're sharper, brighter, like you're lit from inside. A cold dread settled in his gut. He turned away, biting back the rising panic. She sees it too, the fragment whispered. A fragment of me now lives in you. We are bound. Calder's thoughts spiraled. If Sarah could already see it, what did that mean for the others? For him? Sarah, we have to move, he said abruptly, forcing steel into his voice. This place is going to come down around us. Can you stand? She nodded weakly, and he pulled her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. As they staggered toward what he hoped was the surface, the fragment's voice coiled tighter around his thoughts, each word dripping with quiet satisfaction. You'll thank me, Calder. When the others come, when the real hunt begins, you'll see why you can't let me go. Calder clenched his jaw, ignoring it, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. But in the pit of his stomach, an uneasy truth twisted like a knife. Some part of him didn't want to let go. Calder broke through the last emergency hatch, metal groaning and twisting beneath his hands as if it were no stronger than wet clay. The light that met him wasn't sunlight. Above stretched a sky split by veins of pulsing crimson, clouds torn into ragged ribbons that bled faint light onto the broken earth. The wind carried a sharp electric tang like ozone after a storm, and distant structures, half familiar, half warped, jutted against the horizon. Sarah stumbled out behind him, shielding her eyes. What happened? Calder didn't answer. The world he remembered was gone, cities were gone. Instead, twisted silhouettes of buildings reached like skeletal fingers into the churning sky, and the ground underfoot trembled with some deep, restless force. This is what remains, the fragment whispered, its tone almost reverent. While you slept, the veil tore. You weren't here to hold it shut. Calder's chest tightened. How long were we out? Long enough. Sarah clutched his arm, her voice trembling. Calder, look. He followed her gaze to the ridge beyond the shattered plain. Figures moved there, dozens of them, their shapes wrong, as if drawn by an unsteady hand. Some walked on all fours, others too tall and thin, their movements eerily graceful. Even from this distance, he could feel their attention brush against him, a collective awareness that raised every hair on his body. "They can sense me," the fragment purred. "They will come, and they will not stop." Calder's breath came shallow. "What are they? What comes after the end? What you were made to fight?" Sarah turned to him, her face pale but determined. "Calder, what do we do?" For a long moment he couldn't answer. The wrongness inside him, the alien heat of the fragment, throbbed in sync with the ruined world around them, a constant reminder of what he had become. He could still feel the power coiled beneath his skin, waiting to be called. Finally he said, "We keep moving. We find who's left, and we make this right." Sarah searched his face, then nodded, her grip tightening on his arm. The fragment chuckled, a sound like cracking ice. "You still think you can fight this? Very well. I will give you what you need. For now." Calder turned away from the ridge, from the watching shapes and the wreckage of the world he'd once known. Each step carried him further into a future he hadn't chosen, the fragment's presence a cold weight in his mind. But as the ground shuddered again and distant screams rose to meet the wind, he felt something new bloom alongside the dread: resolve. Whatever had happened to the world, whatever he had become, he wasn't done fighting. And if the fragment thought it owned him, it was wrong. Together, he and Sarah started down the slope into the scarred land below, two small figures against a broken horizon, walking toward whatever waited in the dark.